This case defied any explanation. Disappearances always bring a heavy burden, but when it involves youngsters, the weight of the situation is unbearable. When an entire group of children vanishes from a bus, you're forced to confront nightmares you never imagined. I learned that reality can be far grimmer than fiction. It was a day that changed everything. I'd seen my share of hardship, yet nothing compared to what these children endured. The worst part was that they couldn't understand what had occurred. A television report showed a distressed woman mumbling, "It was supposed to be a day off," in disbelief. Her name was Carmen Field, and her daughter Tessa Field had disappeared along with 15 other students returning home on a bitter December afternoon. 2 days later, Carmen contacted my office pleading for help. She needed someone who would bypass the usual delays and search for her daughter immediately. I had been waiting for a case like this ever since I saw her on the news. Without hesitation, I answered, "I'll handle this," even before she could say another word. For months, my work had been filled with mundane claims and petty disputes. I craved a chance to do something that truly mattered, a case that could restore hope. I needed a fresh start, a project that would bring some light into all the darkness. The blizzard of 2018 struck Clearwater County in ways no one anticipated. Weather forecaster Derek had assured locals that only a light dusting was expected, a promise he would later regret deeply. By early afternoon, the sky darkened, and a thick white snowfall blanketed our small town. Tessa Field was only 13 when she, along with her classmates, vanished without a trace. She had gotten on the bus with her best friend Daisy Monroe, and that was the last time they were seen. They were hurrying inside as the snowfall intensified. Rick Dalton, the bus driver, was at the helm that day, normally greeting passengers warmly, but he kept his eyes fixed ahead in hopes the storm might soon ease. Announcements to close the school came too late to change the course of events. Many students were collected by their relatives, but those who relied on the bus were left behind. Rick's route that day took an extra 20 minutes because of the worsening conditions. "We might need to wait here. It's only getting harsher," he told Principal Henderson. Henderson explained that the school building had lost heat and power, so the students should go home. In truth, only 15 children remained, and Henderson harbored a strong dislike for some of them, referring to a few as troublesome farm kids. While most had already been picked up, Rick's delay made all the difference. Henderson preferred not to be stuck with those she disdained, so she arranged for them to be driven home herself, planning to walk a few blocks to her warm house. Later, many would wonder why she hadn't taken all the children inside, but she never offered an explanation. Just a short distance into the journey, Tessa sensed something was terribly off. Although the rumble of the diesel engine was obvious, she couldn't tell if the bus was really moving. A gust of wind from behind caused the swirling snow to distort the view outside, making it seem as though the bus was nearly standing still. Rick leaned in close to the steering wheel, his face nearly touching the glass as he relied on fleeting glimmers of the road's reflectors. Yet, those markers soon vanished under the heavy snowfall. He'd driven this route many times, and that tiny bit of familiarity kept him going. He once joked that he could steer the bus with his eyes closed, a remark he might have wished he hadn't made. Perhaps he felt that his casual comment had in some way invited this disaster. But the truth was, Rick was not to blame. Eddie Collins became the first child to leave the bus that day. Tessa watched as Eddie stepped off the bus, a mailbox appearing suddenly in the dull gray swirl outside. Eddie looked back briefly at his friends as he disembarked, leaving Tessa wondering if he had sensed that he might never see them again. Later, when I spoke with Eddie, he confessed that the vast white landscape outside had scared him terribly. His fear was genuine. After Eddie disembarked, the bus jolted as its gears shifted, and the mailbox vanished once more into the distance. Lila Summers and Noah Reed were scheduled to be next, but the bus never reached their stop. Instead, it drifted away toward an unfamiliar, eerie location. The paved road seemed to melt beneath the weight of the snow, erasing any clear direction. Rick eventually had to stop as the relentless snowfall swallowed any signs of movement. When he turned off the engine, Tessa remarked that the silence was almost unbearable. Not. Even the wind was audible now. Only a persistent ringing filled Rick's ears, prompting him to hum softly in a futile attempt to break the quiet. Tessa found his humming unsettling. In the rear of the bus, the children fidgeted anxiously. Confusion and fear were etched on their faces, and some did not even register that the vehicle had halted. Tessa was the first to notice a presence outside, a tall shadow emerging from the falling snow. Later, she would admit that her reaction was pure instinct. She began screaming before realizing that her own voice was the source of the terror. Soon, other children joined in the uproar. Rick did nothing to quiet them. Instead, he rose and moved toward the door, careful not to open it. Outside stood a man, unlike anyone I'd seen. Tall and lean, his limbs were awkwardly bent, and his skin was a pale off-white that seemed to shift under the falling snow. His dark, deep-set eyes gave him an unsettling presence, and his mouth was a thin line that set his face apart from anyone familiar. Most children recoiled at his appearance, except for two curious 11-year-olds, Mia Carter and Sophie Fields, who sat near the back. Instead of fear, they simply watched, almost fascinated, with Mia even offering a slight smile. At that moment, Rick opened the door and stepped outside. Strangely, he did not move toward the stranger or try to escape. Instead, he walked to the front of the bus and then glanced back at the children, who were gathered in distress. Tessa later recalled that Rick's face looked sorrowful, as if he knew he wouldn't be returning, and indeed, he never came back. With the door still ajar, the stranger began to move slowly along the side of the bus. His elongated fingers brushed the window, leaving a faint, greasy mark. The children instinctively retreated toward the back as the stranger advanced to the front. He lingered outside, partly hidden from view by the swirling snow. At that point, Mia and Sophie edged their way through the cluster of frightened children. Neither showed the paralyzing terror that gripped the others. As Rick disappeared into the white haze ahead, the stranger continued onward. The air suddenly grew warm and heavy, and Tessa felt a dull pressure in her head as her vision blurred with every step the stranger took onto the bus. This is the last part of the bus journey that anyone remembers. Tessa's account ended there. I had been hired by her parents, who were fed up with the slow progress of the official investigation. Tessa's father, Bruce Field, had long resented the local police chief, Mr. Darby, a feud that dated back to their youth. Carmen's call came on a Friday, and I left from Riverview the following Saturday. By then, the children had been missing for 2 full days. I followed protocol and spoke briefly with the investigators. Though it was clear they would share little, I spent several hours retracing the 12-mile route Rick usually took after school. Typically, it took him 25 minutes from departure until his one stop. We learned this when Tessa's watch froze the moment the stranger stepped aboard. She had seen its second hand slow, then stop completely before she blacked out. In my own drive along that route, the trip took only 8 minutes, and it was obvious that the bus hadn't gone far. There were 3 nearby lakes that could have concealed the bus, yet none of their surfaces were cracked with ice. If the bus had sunk, we wouldn't have known until the warmer months. Fortunately, some clues emerged about 2 weeks after the disappearance. The bus was eventually located, not submerged or hidden in a ditch, but on a long-forgotten road about 30 miles from town. This narrow, unpaved lane led to a dilapidated farmhouse that few locals had ever seen, although some claimed it had always been a part of the landscape. News of the missing yellow bus spread like wildfire, and soon nearly everyone in the county and state was talking about it. It dominated every conversation, and every person kept an eye out for it. That morning, Victor Hale, the mail carrier, noticed a new stop on his route. He had never delivered to 13 South Birch Lane before, yet on that day, the old farmhouse finally received mail. As he leaned out of his truck to deposit a letter, he saw a yellow shape further up the road. Recognizing that distinctive bus yellow, he drove on for 3 minutes until the bus came into view. Trusting his instincts, he immediately phoned the police, convinced that it was the missing bus. A tip from one of my contacts led me to the scene within minutes of the first responders. As I arrived, I saw a little girl stepping out of a folding door. Shielding her eyes from the glare, she emerged into the thick layers of snow. Sadly, Tessa was the only child who left the bus. Paramedics were still en route, so she was quickly wrapped in a reflective blanket and taken into the care of a kindly officer. A thorough search of the bus confirmed the worst. The remaining children were still unaccounted for. Later, when I questioned Tessa, she recounted every detail up to the moment the silent stranger boarded the bus. The next thing she recalled was being awoken by the arrival of the first officer. Even Victor, from a distance, had sensed he should wait for the authorities. He later confided that he had stopped in his tracks upon seeing a strange 4-digit handprint on the back of the bus. Apart from that mark, there was no sign of a struggle. The bus was empty, its only evidence being scattered belongings. The red stain that formed the handprint was never tied to any of the missing children or anyone else at first. That handprint was peculiar. Though sharply defined, it bore no typical fingerprints. Instead, it consisted of intersecting straight lines that gave it a hash-like appearance, a detail that unsettled me deeply. The 4 digits extended evenly from the palm, with no indication of a missing digit from an injury. It appeared natural. I had thought that these odd characteristics would quickly lead us to someone responsible, yet nothing came of it. At the time, the focus remained on Tessa, and attention was fixed on the empty bus. Oddly, no one seemed to notice the strange farmhouse further up the road. Could it be the children are inside that house? Did Rick take them there for shelter? I asked an officer, who peered toward the building and then looked at me with a puzzled expression, replying, "Inside what?" It was clear that many had overlooked the imposing manor just a short distance away. Still, I felt an inexplicable pull up the gravel road. I noticed a young officer named Jared standing nearby, his eyes fixed on the distant building as if drawn by its mystery. "Shall we go take a look?" I asked him. He hesitated, then slowly nodded. Jared informed his superior that we were heading toward the mansion, and his boss dismissed us without further inquiry. Jared and I set off on foot, intent on finding any clues that might indicate the children had been taken there. I also noted that the bus still had fuel, making its unexpected stop even more baffling. If Rick had led the children to the house, why wouldn't he have driven further? And if the storm was so dense as to hide the house, why would the bus ever have stopped? The inconsistencies gnawed at me until a dreadful thought struck. Perhaps Rick had not been the one guiding them to that house at all. My suspicions deepened when Tessa later mentioned the encounter with the silent stranger. As we neared the mansion, the air grew heavy with a strange odor, a cloying sweetness that filled my throat and churned my stomach. Beneath that saccharine smell lurked the unmistakable odor of decay, grim and disturbingly familiar. I saw Jared lift his sleeve to sniff the air, and though we never said it aloud, we both understood that something terrible had already passed here. The closer we got, the more the old paint on the house seemed to yellow and fine cracks spread across its surface like withered veins. The front door was slathered in layers of a dark, sticky substance that gave it an odd texture. Jared reached out for the worn knob, but before he could grasp it, the door creaked open on its own. Frozen with his hand half extended, he watched as the door slowly opened, as if inviting us inside. A heavy, unpleasant odor burst forth from the dark interior, a mix of sugary decay that made both of us step back instinctively. Jared's hand slid toward his holster as he entered, each step on the creaking wood floor filled with trepidation. The only light came from behind us, filtering weakly through grimy old windows. Even when Jared flipped the light switch, the soft click did nothing to brighten the gloom. I followed him, giving my eyes time to adjust to the near darkness. Shapes began to emerge in the weak light, first appearing as a vague mass near the door. At first, I thought it was a heap of discarded items, but then I realized it was moving. It wasn't a pile of old papers or broken furniture. It was soft, moist, and pulsing slowly. A dark liquid seeped from it, spreading slowly over the floor and releasing the foul stench of rot. On closer inspection, I recognized it as a mound of dead animals, writhing with small insects. The carcasses of deer, rabbits, and several unknown creatures were heaped beneath a peculiar structure that hung from the ceiling. Tangled roots, mixed with strands of hair and rough twine, formed bizarre shapes suspended like a makeshift ornament, and dark fluid dripped steadily from it, onto the decaying mass below. Then something scurried across my foot. I jumped back to see a tiny, ailing mouse limping along the floor, its spine strangely curved. I watched as the little creature, clearly unwell, made its way toward the top of the decaying heap. The mouse reached out as if mesmerized by the suspended structure, then convulsed before collapsing onto the pile. I couldn't endure any more of the gruesome sight. I was about to retreat and wait for reinforcements when a long, hollow moan echoed from the top of a creaking staircase. The sound, deep and measured like an exhaled sigh, urged me to look up, though the faint light did not reach far enough. For a brief moment, I thought I saw movement in the shadows, but I wasn't sure. In hindsight, I realized that it was the silent stranger's doing. "Hello? Rick?" I called out, though no answer came. The creak of rotten wood confirmed someone was above. The ancient pine stairs crumbled under each careful step as I ascended, my feet carefully avoiding the brittle middle steps. At the top, a long hallway stretched before me, far longer than it should have been. At the far end, a door began to close. "Hello? The police are here. Help is coming," I managed to call out, my voice trembling. A deep, resonant hum responded from behind the door, growing louder as I neared. The door's hinges rattled and the warped frame shuddered against the wall as if resisting my approach. I felt as if I were moving through thick water, each step pressing down on my chest until I reached a door painted in deep black. Gripping the knob tightly, I turned it and pushed the door open. Immediately, I saw the source of a spreading red stain on the ceiling, a large pool of blood seeping slowly across the floor. Any rational person would have retreated and called for help, preserving the scene. but my need for answers overrode my caution. Despite every instinct urging me to flee, I exhaled slowly and stepped further inside. The room was empty except for an old rocking chair in one dark corner. There was no sign of the stranger or anyone else. More unsettling was that no one could explain the blood that bubbled up from the cracks in the floor, trickling toward the far corner where a vague shape lurked. I crept closer, careful not to step in the scarlet liquid. As I passed the rocking chair, its creak punctuated the silence. I sensed a presence behind me, and when I turned, the silent stranger had raised his hand to his lips in a soft shh. His other hand pointed to the dark corner, and his mouth split into a disturbing smile unnaturally wide. His vacant eyes seemed to stare without blink, and though terror surged through me, I was unable to move. My feet felt as if they were stuck to the floor. With no alternative, I followed his gaze toward that shadowy recess. From that dark space, Noah Reed emerged first, his expression blank and his eyes unfocused, as though he were drifting in a dream. One by one, the other children stepped out from the darkness, crossing a slowly expanding pool of red liquid as if on autopilot. They gathered around me as if drawn by an unspoken command. Lila Summers was the last to appear. I glanced back at the silent stranger, but the chair now sat empty despite its gentle sway. My legs finally moved, pushing me forward as I guided the children out into the long hallway and down the broken stairs, past the gruesome mound until we emerged into the daylight. I urged them to focus on the brightness ahead as we hurried away. Outside, Jared still had not returned with backup. Even as we stepped onto the street, it seemed that no one noticed our presence. We walked for what felt like ages before a paramedic finally saw us and ran over, calling for help. Soon, warm blankets and comforting adults enveloped the children. Tessa watched our return from the back of an ambulance, her face shifting to pure terror as she searched the crowd. "Are you all right?" I asked, pushing past the gathering. In a shaky voice, she managed, Is Lana. Where is she?" It became clear that Daisy, along with Mia and Sophie, was still missing. Then the focus shifted entirely to me as questions flew. Where are the rest of the children? How did you find these ones? What happened? Who exactly are you? My answers only deepened the confusion. "What house?" someone finally asked. I led them to the imposing Victorian manor, and only then did some recognize it. I explained what to expect and said I would wait outside, watching as their flashlights scanned the windows of the mansion. From the yard, I noted that the building's exterior did not match the interior I had witnessed. Chief Darby appeared at the doorway with his flashlight in hand. He exchanged a few curt words with someone inside then, motioned for me to come over with a clear look of disapproval. His demeanor reminded me why Bruce Field despised him. I didn't want to return to that building, but his expression made it clear that I had no choice. As I approached, I realized he seemed immune to the lingering odor, a faint reminder of what we had witnessed. Officers swept flashlights across the entry, and astonishingly, the pile of dead animals and hanging structure had vanished. I looked back at Jared, who stood on the steps in clear confusion. "Where did you find the kids?" Chief Darby demanded, glancing back into the dark interior. I stammered, distracted by the fact that the room now looked completely ordinary. Clearing his throat, he pressed for an answer, and I finally said, "Upstairs, at the end of the hall, I believe." There was no trace of the red liquid or the old chair. It was as if everything had been scrubbed away. I simply shrugged, and they assumed I'd been overwhelmed by stress. Jared, too, appeared troubled, unable to reconcile what he had seen with the now normal appearance of the mansion. Official reports later stated that the children were found in an upstairs room, with many believing I had mistaken a dark corner for a closet. The children offered little help. None would speak about the events except Tessa, whose detailed account was attributed to her having been left behind on the bus. In the weeks that followed, although most children slowly returned to normal, they still had fewer answers than I did. Many couldn't recall anything after boarding the bus, with only fragments of the ride and the snowfall coming to mind. Tessa's recollection, however, remained clear, which is why we kept returning to her for further details. Nearly 2 weeks after the storm, Tessa finally told me everything she remembered up until the moment the silent stranger entered the bus and her watch stopped. I tried to extract more details from her by referring to what I'd seen inside the house, but she could only repeat what she already knew. "Tell me about the silent stranger," I asked one last time. "Do you know who he really was?" Tessa shook her head and looked down at her feet, avoiding my gaze. I decided not to push further. It wasn't until torn drawings were discovered in Mia's room that I realized there was more to the story. Under Mia's bed, her mother found scraps of paper, pieces torn from larger sheets and scribbled on wildly. Every scrap showed a similar image, a long-limbed, dark-eyed being with only 4 fingers. On my final visit, I asked Tessa if she understood why Mia had drawn that image. Finally, after a long silence, she broke down, sobbing for several minutes before whispering, "I told them not to." She explained that both Mia and Sophie had been behind everything. According to Tessa, and later confirmed by Principal Henderson, Daisy had embarrassed Tessa during lunch a week before the incident. Rumors quickly spread, typical of middle school drama. Mia and Sophie had approached Tessa in the school bathroom, promising to help her forget the humiliation and exact revenge on Daisy. They told her that the silent stranger could change everything if she offered a sacrifice. Daisy's soul, they claimed. In return, Tessa would regain her pride and Mia and Sophie would escape their isolation. All Tessa needed to do was give up a lock of her hair as a token. Although Tessa refused, the 2 girls had already decided. Mia had written a letter, and Sophie had handed over the lock of hair. Immediately, I recalled the envelope delivered by Victor Hale to that isolated house at a long-forgotten mailbox on the road. The image of the eerie hanging structure above the gruesome pile, entwined with a lock of hair stained with red, flashed in my mind. I left Tessa that day feeling deep sorrow for the blame she carried. The drive back to the mansion felt even longer than before, as if the distance had grown overnight. Had I not been alert, I might have missed the broken mailbox altogether. I swung open the small wooden door and peered inside, where I found the black envelope Victor had delivered still tucked away. My hand trembled as I pulled it out. I knew I should have called the police immediately, but a desperate need to understand the horrific truth drove me to open it right then. The first thing that struck me was the messy, childish handwriting scrawled on the envelope, an address for the cursed house up the road. Inside, the note contained only 4 short lines. "Dear sir, I have a deal to make. 2 lives in exchange for silence's sake. Take the souls to erase false lies. Let them vanish. Restore my pride." The letter was postmarked on the same day the bus disappeared. This was the very note Tessa had insisted the girls should never send, yet it mentioned no wish for escape and demanded the cost of 2 souls. I didn't reveal all this to Tessa's parents when I asked for another look in her room. Instead, I claimed I was searching for any evidence to support her story, clues she might not realize were significant. They then took her out for dinner at the town's only family restaurant while I continued my investigation. What I found later shook me deeply. In the back of her closet, hidden beneath a pile of clothes, were several large drawings on butcher paper. Some depicted the mansion, others the gruesome pile of dead animals, and one even showed the old rocking chair. However, every drawing that should have depicted the silent stranger was missing. A large, jagged gap remained where he should have been. I collected these sheets and brought them to the station, where Jared retrieved additional drawings found under Mia's bed. The torn edges from one set perfectly matched the missing parts in Tessa's drawings. None of this, however, provided a clear explanation. The three girls were still unaccounted for, and the only suspect remained the silent stranger with his oddly long four-fingered hand. Regardless of who had summoned him, he was clearly behind their disappearance. I truly believed that Tessa's regret and sorrow were real, yet I doubted the mystery of the silent stranger would ever be solved. The blood from that strange handprint matched the blood on my boots and on the children's shoes. It did not match anyone in the system, though it did resemble a sample from a 50-year-old cold case. A case involving a missing boy and a discarded handkerchief. The following spring, Rick's fate was sealed when his body was found 27 miles from where the bus was located, buried beneath a deep snowdrift. It was evident he had succumbed to the harsh weather. Later that year, Tessa returned to school. Her parents reported that despite everything, and even with her involvement in the case, she was happier than before. She even began dating, starting with her first boyfriend, Noah Reed.